The gunshot pierced the desert air like thunder, forcing Theodora Finley to duck behind the weathered water barrel outside her family's small mercantile store in Circleville, Utah. The year was 1878, and for the third time this month, drunken cowboys were shooting at the town sign for sport. Theodora Thea, to the few who dared befriend her, clutched her leather-bound journal to her chest and waited for the commotion to pass. "Miss Finley," called a mocking voice. "Why you hiding? Afraid some man might actually look your way?" Raucous laughter followed as Thea closed her eyes, counting silently to 10. At 26, she'd grown accustomed to being the subject of the town's cruel jokes. Too outspoken, too educated, too independent, everything a woman shouldn't be according to Circleville's standards. "Pay them no mind," she whispered to herself, repeating the mantra her late father had taught her. "Their words are merely dust in the wind." When the men finally moved on, Thea straightened her practical calico dress and returned to sweeping the porch. The mercantile had been her responsibility since her father passed 3 winters ago from pneumonia. Her mother had died during childbirth when Thea was just 8, leaving only distant cousins back east who wanted nothing to do with frontier life. "You really ought to find yourself a husband, Mrs. Peterson commented as she approached the store, basket of eggs in hand. "Store's too much for a lone woman. Besides, you're not getting any younger." Thea forced a tight smile. "Good morning to you too, Mrs. Peterson. Those eggs look particularly fine today." The older woman wasn't deterred. "Sheriff's deputy, Mr. Collins. He's still unmarried. Not much to look at, but beggars can't be choosers, dear." "I'll keep that in mind," Thea replied, though she had no intention of pursuing the balding, 40-year-old deputy who couldn't string 2 words together without spitting. Inside the mercantile, Thea arranged the latest shipment of dry goods, her mind drifting to the stack of newspaper clippings hidden beneath her mattress. Stories of women doctors in Boston, female journalists in New York, and suffragettes fighting for the vote. In another life, perhaps she could have been one of them. The bell above the door jingled, pulling Thea from her reverie. Sheriff Malcolm stood in the doorway, his weathered face grim. "Miss Finley, got some bad news," he said, removing his hat. "Stage was robbed 15 miles south. Drivers injured but alive. Passengers are shaken up but unharmed." "How terrible," Thea replied, genuinely concerned. "Was it the Carson gang again?" The sheriff nodded. "Seems likely. This is the 3rd robbery in 2 months. I'm gathering a posse to track them down." "I hope you catch them quickly," Thea said, thinking of the medicine shipment due on next week's stage. The town couldn't afford to lose it. As the sheriff left, Mrs. Peterson leaned across the counter. "You know what they're saying about you, don't you?" Thea sighed. "I imagine it's the same thing they've been saying for years." "They're saying you'll never find a man," Mrs. Peterson whispered dramatically. "That no proper husband would want a woman who reads more than the Bible and keeps a store like a man." "Then I suppose I'll die alone with my books and my dignity intact," Thea replied evenly. The older woman clucked her tongue. "Pride goeth before the fall, Miss Finley." That evening, as Thea closed the store and climbed the narrow stairs to her small apartment above, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. The loneliness sometimes pressed down on her like a physical weight. Not that she was desperate for a husband. Most of the men in Circleville were either crude cowboys passing through, married farmers, or elderly widowers looking for a nurse more than a wife. She wanted more than Circleville could offer, but the mercantile was her father's legacy. He'd built it from nothing, and she couldn't bear to sell it, even as the bank pressured her about the outstanding loan. 3 days later, Thea was inventorying supplies when the door burst open. 2 men carried in a third, blood soaking through a makeshift bandage on his shoulder. "He's been shot," the taller man said urgently. Doc Pierce is out delivering the Hanson baby, said to bring him here. Put him on the counter, Thea directed, quickly clearing away the fabric bolts she'd been organizing. The wounded man groaned as they laid him down. Thea had assisted the doctor enough times to know what to do. She gathered clean cloths, alcohol, and the medical supplies she kept on hand for emergencies. I need to remove his shirt to see the wound, she said, already working on the buttons. Madam, the wounded man protested weakly, his voice a deep rumble despite his pain. This ain't proper. Neither is bleeding to death on my counter, Thea retorted, continuing her work. The bullet had gone clean through his left shoulder, missing any major blood vessels from what she could tell. After cleaning and bandaging the wound, Thea instructed the men to carry him upstairs to her spare room. I can't impose, the injured man argued, though he was too weak to resist as his companions lifted him. You can pay me back by not dying and staining my quilts, Thea replied practically. What happened? Ambushed by the Carson gang, the taller man explained as they carefully navigated the stairs. We're bounty hunters, been tracking them for weeks. Thea's eyebrows shot up. Bounty hunters, name's Tom Wilson, the taller man said. This here's Luke Myers, and our bleeding friend is Brody Vance. Brody Vance. The name tickled something in Thea's memory. She'd read about a bounty hunter by that name in one of the newspapers from back east, something about bringing in a notorious gang leader in Colorado territory. Once Brody was settled in the spare room, Thea shooed his companions away. Go inform the sheriff. I'll watch over him until the doctor can come. Left alone with her patient, Thea studied him properly for the first time. Despite the pallor from blood loss, he was undeniably handsome, strong jaw covered in dark stubble, straight nose, and thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so. His eyes fluttered open, startlingly blue against his tan face. Where am I? Safe, Thea answered, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. You're in Circleville, Utah, above my mercantile store. You the owner? He asked, surprise evident in his voice. I am, Theodora Finley. Most call me Thea. Brody Vance, he replied, wincing as he tried to shift position. Though I reckon you already know that. Rest now, Mr. Vance. Doctor will be by soon enough. His eyes were already drifting closed again. Thank you, Miss Finley. By morning, Brody's fever had broken, and Dr. Pierce had visited, confirming Thea's assessment that the wound was clean and should heal well with rest. You did fine work, Thea, the elderly doctor said. Might have saved his life with that quick thinking. Word spread quickly through Circleville that Theodora Finley was nursing a handsome bounty hunter in her apartment. By midday, a parade of townswomen had invented reasons to visit the mercantile, each one more transparent than the last. Just wanted to see if you needed any help with your patient, Mrs. Peterson said, eyes gleaming with curiosity. He's resting comfortably, thank you, Thea replied, guiding the woman firmly back toward the door. A single woman hosting a strange man overnight, quite improper, Mrs. Wallace commented loudly to no one in particular. Thea bit her tongue to keep from pointing out that saving a man's life trumped propriety. Instead, she focused on running her store and checking on her patient between customers. Brody proved to be a surprisingly compliant patient. He slept most of that first day, but by evening was awake enough to take some broth and make conversation. Your friend stopped by, Thea informed him as she changed his bandage. They've gone to follow a lead on the Carson gang near Beaver, said they'd return in a few days. Brody nodded, grimacing slightly as she cleaned around the wound. They're good men. We've been tracking those outlaws for nearly 2 months. What makes a man choose bounty hunting? Thea asked, genuinely curious. He was quiet for a moment. Justice, I suppose. After the war, seemed like there wasn't much order left. Too many men learned violence and brought it home with them. You fought in the war, Union Army. Enlisted at 18, came home at 22 with nothing but nightmares and a skill with a gun. His eyes held hers. What about you? Most women your age would be married with children by now, not running a store alone. Thea busied herself with rewrapping his shoulder. I suppose I never found a compelling reason to change my situation. No suitors in Circleville. None that see beyond a convenient shopkeeper or a challenge to be conquered. She straightened. Rest now. I'll bring dinner later. Over the next 3 days, Brody regained his strength rapidly. By the 4th day, he was insisting on helping around the store, despite Thea's protests that he should rest. I've imposed enough, he said, following her downstairs. Least I can do is make myself useful. Thea found herself enjoying his company more than she cared to admit. Unlike most men she'd met, Brody listened when she spoke. He asked questions about the store, about her father, about the books she read. He didn't seem bothered by her independence or intelligence. These ledgers are meticulously kept, he commented one evening as she worked on the monthly accounts. You have a good head for business. My father insisted I learn, Thea explained. He said a woman should be able to stand on her own 2 feet. Wise man. The bell above the door jingled and Sheriff Malcolm entered, followed by a stern-looking man in a banker's suit. Evening, Miss Finley, the sheriff said, removing his hat. Mr. Roberts here wanted a word. Thea's stomach tightened. Horace Roberts was the bank manager who held her father's loan. His monthly visits had become increasingly unpleasant. Miss Finley, Roberts began, I've come to discuss the matter of your overdue payment. I'll have it by the end of the week, Thea promised, aware of Brody's curious gaze. Roberts shook his head. I'm afraid that won't do. The bank has been more than patient, but your father's debt has only grown since his passing. My shipment of specialty goods arrives tomorrow, Thea argued. I have several customers waiting, Miss Finley, Roberts interrupted. The bank is prepared to foreclose unless full payment is received by the end of the month. Thea felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible. You know I can't raise that much so quickly. Perhaps you should reconsider Mr. Collins's proposal, Roberts suggested with false concern. A woman alone simply cannot manage such financial responsibilities. After they left, Thea stood frozen, hands gripping the counter edge so tightly her knuckles whitened. How much do you need? Brody asked quietly. That's not your concern, Thea snapped, immediately regretting her tone. I apologize, this isn't your problem. Sometimes an outside perspective helps, he offered. I've got some savings from my last bounty. Thea shook her head firmly. I wouldn't dream of it. Besides, I've been in tight spots before. That night, unable to sleep, Thea sat by her window staring out at the moonlit Main Street. The mercantile was more than a business, it was her home, her independence, her father's legacy. Losing it would mean losing everything. A soft knock at her bedroom door startled her. Thea, are you awake? Brody's deep voice called softly. She opened the door to find him standing there in borrowed trousers, his chest bare except for the bandage. She forced herself to maintain eye contact. I heard you moving about, he explained. Thought you might want some company. They sat at her small kitchen table, sharing a pot of tea. Brody listened, as Thea explained her situation, how her father had taken out a loan to expand the store just before a drought hit the region, how business had never fully recovered, and how she'd been barely keeping ahead of the interest payments since his death. The townspeople don't help much, she admitted. They think a woman has no business running a store. Half of them only shop here out of habit or necessity. And this Collins fellow, Brody asked carefully. The one the banker mentioned, Thea grimaced. Deputy Sheriff Collins has made it clear he would solve my financial troubles if I married him. He's also made it clear he expects a wife to know her place, which is not running a store, precisely. Brody was quiet for a moment, studying his tea. My partners and I tracked the Carson gang to this area for a reason. They've robbed 3 stages and 2 banks in the territory. The bounty on them is substantial. Thea looked up sharply. You're not fully healed yet. I've worked with worse, he said with a half smile. Tom and Luke should be back tomorrow. If we can bring in the Carson gang, the reward would more than cover your debt. That's dangerous, Brody. Those men are killers. So am I when necessary, he replied, his blue eyes hardening momentarily before softening again. Get some rest, Thea. Things often look clearer in the morning. The next day brought Tom and Luke back to Circleville, along with solid information about the Carson gang's hideout in the mountains to the east. Despite Thea's concerns, Brody insisted he was well enough to ride out with them the following morning. We'll be back in 3 days, he promised as he prepared to leave, with or without the Carsons. Thea handed him a package of food supplies and fresh bandages. Be careful, that shoulder isn't fully healed. I've got a good reason to come back in one piece, Brody replied, holding her gaze a moment longer than necessary before mounting his horse. The 3 days stretched into 5, and Thea found herself watching the road anxiously, jumping at every sound of approaching horses. On the 6th day, as she was closing the store, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. 4 riders approached Tom, Luke, Brody, and a bound man slumped over his saddle. The Carson gang's notorious leader, Jacob Carson himself. We got him, Brody announced as they reined in front of the mercantile. His face was grimy with trail dust, a fresh cut above his eyebrow, but he was smiling triumphantly. His brothers are dead. They chose to fight rather than surrender. The sheriff and his deputies took Carson into custody while the town buzzed with excitement. After giving their statements, the bounty hunters returned to Thea's store. The territory's offering $2,000 for Carson, Brody explained. Should be enough to clear your debt with plenty left over. Relief flooded through Thea, momentarily weakening her knees. I don't know how to thank you. No need, Brody replied. You saved my life. Consider us even. But as the days passed and the reward money was processed, Thea sensed Brody's imminent departure approaching. He'd healed well, and there was no reason for him to linger in Circleville. The thought of him leaving created an unexpected hollowness in her chest. They'd fallen into an easy routine mornings working together in the store, afternoons where Brody would help with deliveries or repairs while Thea attended to customers, evenings spent talking by lamplight about everything from books to their childhoods. What will you do now? Thea asked one evening as they sat on the small balcony outside her apartment, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. There's always another bounty, Brody replied, though he didn't sound particularly enthusiastic. Tom and Luke are already talking about heading to Arizona territory. Heard tell of some train robbers with a hefty price on their heads. Will you go with them? He was quiet for a long moment. I've been thinking about settling down. 10 years of chasing outlaws is enough for any man. Thea's heart quickened, but she kept her voice neutral. Where would you settle? Somewhere like this, perhaps, he said, glancing at her before looking back at the sunset. Small town, good people. A place where a man might start over. Before Thea could respond, Mrs. Peterson's voice called up from below. Miss Finley, is that you up there with that bounty hunter, in the evening hours, alone? Thea suppressed a groan. Yes, Mrs. Peterson, we're just watching the sunset. Well, I never. What would your father say? The whole town is talking, you know. After the nosy neighbor departed, Brody chuckled. "I believe I've damaged your reputation, Miss Finley." "It wasn't particularly pristine to begin with," Thea replied with a wry smile. "According to Circleville, I'm already a lost cause, a spinster shopkeeper who reads too much and speaks her mind too freely." "Their loss," Brody said softly. "I find those qualities rather appealing." The following day, Thea was arranging a new shipment of fabrics when Mr. Roberts entered the store, looking considerably more cordial than during his last visit. "Miss Finley," he greeted her. "I understand congratulations are in order. The bank has received your payment in full." "Thank you, Mr. Roberts," Thea replied, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. "I trust everything is in order now." "Indeed," he hesitated, "though I must say I was surprised by the source of the funds." "The source?" "Mr. Vance informed us the money came from the bounty on Jacob Carson, but that you were instrumental in Carson's capture by providing crucial information." Roberts looked skeptical. "Is that accurate?" Thea blinked in confusion. She'd done no such thing. Before she could correct him, Brody appeared from the storeroom. "Miss Finley is too modest," he said smoothly. "Without her knowledge of local terrain and her suggestion about checking the old mining camp, we might never have located Carson's hideout." After Roberts left, Thea turned to Brody with narrowed eyes. "What was that about?" "I gave you no information about Carson's whereabouts," Brody shrugged. "I may have embellished your role when filling out the reward paperwork. The territory is paying you $500 as an informant." "But that's not true. You saved my life, housed me, fed me, and cared for me," Brody countered. "Without you, I wouldn't have been able to capture Carson at all. The money is rightfully yours." Thea shook her head, torn between gratitude and indignation. "You can't just, 'I can and I did,'" he interrupted gently. "Besides, it's already done. The bank has been paid and the remaining funds are in your account." That evening, as they closed the store together, Brody grew uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Tom and Luke are leaving tomorrow," he said. "Heading to Arizona, as I mentioned." Thea's hand stilled on the ledger she was updating. "I see. Will you be joining them?" "That depends." "On what?" Brody stepped closer. "On whether there might be a reason for me to stay in Circleville." Thea's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "What reason might that be, Mr. Vance?" "Perhaps a business opportunity," he suggested, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I've been thinking about your store. Business would improve if you could expand your inventory, maybe add a proper hardware section. With my share of the bounty, I could invest." "Are you proposing a business partnership?" Thea asked, trying to ignore the flicker of disappointment. "Among other things," Brody replied, taking another step toward her. "I find myself reluctant to leave, Thea, not because of the store, but because of its owner." Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled. Deputy Collins entered, his thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "Evening, Miss Finley," he said, ignoring Brody completely. "I've come about a matter of some delicacy." "What is it, Deputy?" Thea asked, stepping back from Brody. Collins glanced pointedly at Brody. "It's a private matter." "Mr. Vance is my business partner," Thea said firmly. "You can speak freely." The deputy's face reddened. "Very well. There have been complaints about the impropriety of your current living arrangement. A single woman housing a man under the same roof, it's causing talk." "Is talk against the law now, Deputy?" Brody asked mildly. Collins bristled. "This doesn't concern you, bounty hunter." "It seems it does," Brody countered, moving to stand beside Thea. "Especially since I'm the source of this supposed impropriety." "Miss Finley's reputation is at stake," Collins insisted. The decent folk of this town have been quite content to shop at Miss Finley's store while simultaneously questioning her ability to run it." Brody interrupted. They've been happy to benefit from her father's legacy while suggesting she abandon it for marriage. That's different, Colin sputtered. A woman needs protection, guidance. Miss Finley has demonstrated she needs neither, Brody stated. She's managed this store single-handedly for 3 years, kept it profitable despite obstacles, and earned the respect of those whose opinions actually matter. Thea stared at Brody, warmth blooming in her chest at his defense. Collins's face darkened. My offer of marriage still stands, Miss Finley. It would resolve these issues of propriety. That won't be necessary, Thea replied firmly, but I thank you for your concern. After the fuming deputy left, Thea turned to Brody. Thank you for that. I only spoke the truth, he said. Though I suspect I've made an enemy of Deputy Collins. Join the club, Thea replied with a small laugh. Now, about this business partnership you mentioned. Over dinner that evening, they discussed the possibilities. Brody had ideas for expanding the mercantile, adding hunting and mining supplies that would attract more of the men who typically avoided women's stores. With the remaining bounty money, they could order new inventory and perhaps hire help. You've given this considerable thought, Thea observed. I have, Brody admitted. Though I should be clear about my intentions, Thea, I'm not just interested in a business partnership. Their eyes met across the table. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Vance? A partnership of another kind, eventually. He reached for her hand. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never met anyone like you. You're brave, intelligent, kind, and stubborn as a mule when necessary. Thea laughed softly. Such flattery. It's the truth. His expression grew serious. I'm not asking for promises right now. Just a chance to see if what I think we both feel might grow into something permanent. And if it doesn't, Thea asked practically, though her heart was racing. Then we remain business partners if you'll have me, or I'll sell my share back to you and move on. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But I don't think that will be necessary. That night, alone in her room, Thea found herself both excited and terrified. Brody was unlike any man she'd met. He respected her independence, admired her capabilities, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. But a lifetime of protecting herself made trust difficult. In the morning, Thea found Brody already downstairs, reorganizing the storeroom to create more space. He looked up when she entered, a smile spreading across his face. Good morning, he greeted her. I hope you don't mind. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd make myself useful. Not at all. She watched him work for a moment. I've been thinking about your proposal. Brody straightened, giving her his full attention. The business partnership makes sense, Thea continued. As for the other, I'm willing to see where it leads, but I need you to understand something. This store is my life. I won't give it up, not even for. I would never ask you to, Brody interrupted. That's not the kind of partnership I'm proposing. I don't want you to be less so I can be more, Thea. That's not how it works, not with the right person. Before she could respond, Tom and Luke arrived to say their farewells. They seemed unsurprised by Brody's decision to stay in Circleville. Knew you were sweet on the lady shopkeeper, Luke teased. Haven't seen you look at a woman like that since before the war. Take care of him, Miss Finley, Tom said as they prepared to leave. He's the best man I know, though he'd never admit it. Over the next few weeks, Brody and Thea settled into a new routine. They worked side by side in the store, expanding inventory and improving displays. Brody moved into a small room at the boarding house to quiet the town gossip, though he spent most of his waking hours at the mercantile. Word spread about the new partnership, and curiosity brought in customers who hadn't visited the store in months. Many were surprised to find an expanded selection of goods and competitive prices. Business improved steadily. You were right about adding the hunting supplies, Thea admitted one evening as they reviewed the day's receipts. We've had more male customers this week than in the past 6 months combined. And you were right about ordering those fashion plates from back east, Brody replied. Mrs. Wallace has visited 3 times to look at them. We make a good team, Thea said softly. We do, Brody agreed, his gaze lingering on her face. In all ways. Their first kiss happened naturally one evening as they walked back from dinner at the hotel restaurant. Under the starlit sky, Brody gently pulled Thea into the shadow of the livery stable and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was tender at first, then deepening as Thea responded. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Brody rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the day I could stand up straight again. Thea laughed softly. That long? Longer if I'm being honest, he confessed. Even with a bullet in my shoulder, I noticed how beautiful you are when you're giving orders. As summer turned to autumn, their relationship deepened. Brody proved to be not just a capable business partner but a thoughtful companion. He listened to Thea's dreams of expanding the store, perhaps even opening a small lending library section where townspeople could borrow books for a small fee. You could order newspapers from back east, too, Brody suggested. Keep people informed about what's happening outside Circleville. You don't think that's too ambitious? Thea asked. Brody shook his head. I think you could do anything you set your mind to, Thea Finley. Always have. Not everything was smooth sailing. Deputy Collins continued to make his disapproval known, and some of the more conservative townspeople still whispered about the impropriety of their partnership. But as the mercantile thrived, even the staunchest critics had to acknowledge that Brody Vance had been good for business and good for Thea. He looks at you like you hung the moon, Mrs. Pierce, the doctor's wife, commented one day as she selected fabric for new curtains. Never thought I'd see the day a man appreciated a woman with a mind of her own. Mr. Vance is different, Thea replied, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. Different is good, Mrs. Pierce said with a knowing smile. Especially when different means treating you as an equal rather than a possession. As winter approached, bringing the first snowfall to Circleville, Brody and Thea faced their first real test. A telegram arrived for Brody. A lucrative bounty had been posted for a notorious outlaw, last seen near the Utah-Colorado border. His former partners had already taken the job and suggested Brody join them. It's a lot of money, Thea said quietly when Brody showed her the telegram. You should go if you want to. Brody studied her face. Is that what you think I want? I wouldn't presume to know. After all these months, you still don't trust that I'm here to stay? Brody asked, a hint of frustration in his voice. That I've chosen this life with you over chasing bounties. People change their minds, Thea replied, unable to meet his eyes. Men especially. My father was the exception, not the rule. Brody gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. I'm not going anywhere, Thea, not for a bounty, not for anything. The only treasure I'm interested in is right here in Circleville. That night, as snow fell gently outside, Brody asked Thea to marry him, not on bended knee with flowery words, but sitting beside her on the sofa in her apartment, his hand warm around hers. I love you, he said simply. I love your strength, your intelligence, your compassion. I love the way you refuse to be less than who you are. I want to spend my life with you, building something together as equals. Tears blurred Thea's vision, even though they said I'd never find a man. Brody smiled, brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek, especially because of that. They were looking at you all wrong, seeing what you lacked instead of everything you are. And what am I? Thea whispered. Everything, Brody replied. Smart, capable, brave. You found enough in yourself to build a life many would envy. I'm just hoping you'll let me be part of it." Their wedding was small but joyful, held in the town church on a crisp December day. Dr. Pierce gave the bride away, and to everyone's surprise, even Mrs. Peterson dabbed at her eyes during the ceremony. "Never thought I'd see the day," she sniffled to her neighbor. "Our Theodora Finley, married at last." "To a former bounty hunter, no less," her friend whispered back. "Though he's proved himself a fine businessman these past months." The mercantile closed for 2 days, while the newlyweds enjoyed a brief honeymoon at a hot springs resort 30 miles away. Upon their return, they moved into the expanded apartment above the store, which Brody had secretly renovated as a wedding gift, adding a proper sitting room and expanding the kitchen. Spring brought new beginnings. The Vance Mercantile, renamed to reflect their partnership, thrived under their joint management. Brody's steady presence and business acumen complemented Thea's attention to detail and customer knowledge. Together, they transformed the struggling store into the most successful business in Circleville. "You know what they're saying now, don't you?" Mrs. Pierce asked one day as Thea wrapped her purchases. "I can only imagine," Thea replied dryly. "They're saying Brody Vance is the smartest man in the territory for marrying you," Mrs. Pierce said with a smile, "and that any man would be lucky to find a woman with half your capabilities." Thea laughed. "The town's memory is conveniently short." "That's people for you," Mrs. Pierce agreed. "But it's a good change, don't you think?" It was indeed. Younger women in town began to look to Thea as an example, a woman who had succeeded on her own terms and found love without compromising her identity. Several even approached her about learning bookkeeping or business management. "You've started something," Brody observed one evening as they closed the store together. "A quiet revolution." "Hardly that dramatic," Thea demurred, though she was pleased by the thought. "I disagree," Brody said, pulling her into his arms. "You're changing minds just by being yourself." "That's powerful, Thea." In late summer, almost a year after Brody had first stumbled bleeding into her store, Thea discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled her with both joy and apprehension. "What about the store?" she worried as they discussed the future. "I can't abandon it, but a baby needs, we'll manage," Brody assured her. "Together, the same way we've handled everything else." And they did. When their son, James Michael Vance, was born the following spring, Brody took over running the store for several weeks, allowing Thea time to recover and bond with the baby. Once she was ready to return, they worked in shifts, ensuring one of them was always available for their son. "You make it look easy," Mrs. Wallace commented one day, watching Thea calculate a customer's bill with baby James sleeping peacefully in a cradle behind the counter. "It's not easy," Thea replied honestly, "but it's possible with the right partner." As James grew from infant to toddler, the mercantile expanded again. Brody built a proper addition, doubling the store's size and adding a dedicated book and newspaper section, just as Thea had dreamed. They hired 2 assistants, young women eager to learn the business, allowing Thea more flexibility with her time. Deputy Collins, who had eventually married a widow from a neighboring town, grudgingly became one of their regular customers. "Never thought I'd say it," he admitted to Brody one day, "but you two have built something special here. Town's better for it." 3 years after James's birth, their daughter Elizabeth Rose joined the family. By then, the Vance Mercantile had become not just a store but a community gathering place. The reading room Thea had established attracted both young and old, and the weekly newspaper deliveries from Salt Lake City and beyond kept Circleville connected to the wider world. "Remember when they said I'd never find a man?" Thea mused one evening as she and Brody sat on their expanded balcony, watching their children play in the small garden they'd created behind the store. Brody smiled, reaching for her hand. "I prefer to remember what I said, that you'd found enough in yourself already." "You did say that," Thea acknowledged, squeezing his fingers. "It was the first time anyone had ever valued me for exactly who I was." "I still do," Brody replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "Every day." As twilight settled over Circleville, painting the distant mountains in deepening shades of purple, Thea reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a lonely shopkeeper fighting to preserve her father's legacy to a respected businesswoman, wife, and mother, she had transformed not just her own life but helped shift the perceptions of an entire town. "What are you thinking about?" Brody asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "How life surprises you," Thea answered. "How the thing you think you want isn't always what you need." "And what did you need?" Thea smiled, watching as James carefully showed his little sister how to water the flowers. "Not just a man," she said softly, "but a partner. Someone who saw my strength as an asset, not a liability." "I'd say you found him," Brody teased, his blue eyes twinkling in the fading light. "No," Thea corrected gently. "We found each other and built something neither of us could have created alone." The mercantile bell rang from below, signaling a late customer despite the closed sign. Brody sighed dramatically before standing. "I'll go. Probably Mr. Henderson forgetting we close early on Saturdays." As he headed downstairs, Thea gathered the children, guiding them inside for supper. Their home above the store had expanded along with their family. Now a warm, comfortable haven filled with books, laughter, and love. Later that night, with the children tucked into bed and the store securely locked below, Thea and Brody sat together by the fire, discussing plans for further expanding their business to include a mail-order catalog for remote ranches. "We could reach people all the way to the territory borders," Thea explained excitedly. "Families who can't make the journey to town regularly." "Always thinking ahead," Brody said admiringly. "That's my wife." "Our success has always been a partnership," Thea reminded him. "Your ideas about inventory management revolutionized our operation." Brody pulled her closer on the sofa. "Do you ever regret it, staying in Circleville when you once dreamed of seeing those big eastern cities?" Thea considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder about the road not taken," she admitted. "But no, I don't regret it. We've built something meaningful here, not just for ourselves but for the community." "We could still travel," Brody suggested. "Now that James is older and the assistants are well trained. Take a trip to Boston or New York, see those women doctors and journalists you used to read about." The idea sparked excitement in Thea's chest. "Do you mean it?" "Of course," Brody replied. "Why not? The store won't collapse without us for a few weeks. And the children would benefit from seeing more of the world." This was the difference, Thea realized, between the life she'd feared and the one she'd found. Not a choice between independence and marriage, but a partnership that enhanced rather than diminished her dreams. 10 years after a wounded bounty hunter had changed the course of her life, Theodora Finley Vance stood at the center of a life richer than she'd ever imagined possible. The mercantile had grown from a struggling general store to the commercial heart of Circleville. Their family had expanded to include a third child, young William, now just beginning to toddle. And the community that had once whispered about her prospects had come to respect both her business acumen and her unconventional path. "They said I'd never find a man," Thea sometimes reminded Brody with a smile, "but you said I'd found enough in myself already." "And I was right," he would always reply. "Though I'm grateful every day that you found room in your life for me too." On their 10th wedding anniversary, The town of Circleville surprised the Vances with a celebration honoring their contributions to the community. The mayor presented them with a plaque commemorating a decade of service and innovation. "The Vance Mercantile has put our little town on the map," he declared to applause, "and shown us that progress comes in many forms." Later that evening, as they walked home arm in arm under a canopy of stars, Brody stopped suddenly and turned to face Thea. "What is it?" she asked, noticing the intensity in his expression. "I was just thinking about the day I was shot," he said. "How close I came to riding past Circleville entirely." "But you didn't," Thea reminded him, reaching up to touch his face. "No," Brody agreed, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "And finding you was worth every bit of pain that bullet caused." As they continued home to their children and the life they'd built together, Thea reflected on how wrong those whispers had been. She hadn't needed to find a man, she'd needed to find herself first. And in doing so, she discovered not just a husband but a true partner who valued her exactly as she was. The store bell jingled welcomingly as they stepped inside. The familiar scent of leather-bound books, fresh coffee, and possibility greeting them like an old friend. This was their legacy, not just a successful business or a loving family, but a living example of partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the courage to defy expectations. In the quiet of their home, with their children sleeping peacefully and the town of Circleville spread out below their windows, Thea and Brody Vance had created something rare and precious, a life that honored both their individual strengths and their combined vision. A testament to what was possible when love was founded not on conformity, but on celebration of each other's true nature. And as they had discovered together, that was enough, more than enough, for a lifetime of happiness.